Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you once again to ORF and the Emirates Policy Center for having us here today. This is a very interesting session. I feel very privileged to moderate with a group of very diverse professionals from academia, private sector, and practitioners on the ground. And the topic is, as we heard, technology innovation and how it plays a crucial role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, especially for emerging economies in the Global South. So just to quickly set the context, we've heard buzzwords, across the sort of mainstream technology interventions such as artificial intelligence, generative AI, machine learning, but how can these really be applied to address the biggest crisis of our time, which is climate change? And this session will essentially focus on what types of innovations are we talking about, whether it's in energy security, mobility, energy storage, solar. We heard a lot about green hydrogen earlier today, batteries, climate finance, and how can we encourage young, talented innovators on the ground in the Global South, whether they're for-profit entrepreneurs or NGOs, working and really helping them to scale up. And some of the issues we're going to talk about today are, a few. So one of them is capital that's required to scale up these innovations, and different forms of the capital stack, be it from venture capital to grant-based funding to R&D, to growth equity, to venture debt, and public sector financing as well. Which leads us to the role of government as a key stakeholder. How can government, join hands with the private sector and help to fund these innovations and create some cross-border knowledge transfer as well as cross-border capital transfer? And then we also have, very importantly, the role of talent and the rising skills gap, and how do we make this whole transition really inclusive? And we heard about the gender gap, but we're also going to talk about the skills gap, and ways in which we can bridge that sort of resource allocation, and whether it's in very different areas, manufacturing or mobility, or sort of the other sort of parts of the Global South, importantly agriculture, and other ways of sort of solving the climate crisis. So first, I'd like to turn to our panelist, Professor Podge. You've spent a significant amount of time developing the thesis behind the Ecological Impact Fund under the Global Justice Institute at Yale University. And this fund, the idea is that it invites innovators in the Global South to seek impact rewards based on the quantum of emissions reduced. So wanted to know if you could share some examples of how you think the fund can actually function to sort of direct capital or to create incentives for these young innovators to create technologies to solve the climate crisis. And also if there are, some examples of things not to do or where the technologies actually went wrong. And perhaps you can also touch upon, why there's a need to stimulate the growth of green technologies coming from the Global South, and how we can include these countries more in the energy transition.
Yeah, let me start maybe with the last point about why there is such a great need for it. And it is, on the one hand, of course, true that the Global South and the 5 billion people at the bottom of the economic hierarchy in the world are not contributing a great deal to the pollution problem. They account for about 15% of all emissions, but they will account for a much larger share. And of course, they account for the majority of the damage that's being done by the problem. That damage is not just global warming, but it's also air pollution, for example. So we have, according to health statistics, about 8.7 million deaths every year. About 1/7 of all deaths are from air pollution, fossil fuel burning related air pollution. And that's just catastrophic, it's enormous damage. So what we should do is we should ensure that green technologies disseminate better in the Global South. And we should also make sure that more green technologies are made available to the Global South that cater specifically to the needs and interests of poorer populations. These technologies are not very much developed now simply because there isn't a very large market. So, and that gets me to the topic of the Ecological Impact Fund. Basically, the innovation incentives that we now have are patents. That's the key way we make our innovators reliant on patents. And with a patent, they have exclusivity, and that means they can connect monopoly rents from buyers. They can mark up the price not having to fear competition, and then collect these rents. Now, of course, a higher price means that the product becomes less competitive, and often, especially poor populations, will be reduced to using the older, dirtier technologies. I give you one example. In the coal production, coal power plants that work with coal, the latest technology is ultra supercritical technology, for which Matsui Babcock, a Japanese company, has a patent. And some people, especially in China, Harbin Electric, for example, they bought that technology, paid the licensing fee, but Indian coal-fired power plant operators didn't, and simply used the older technology, which is 30% more polluting for the same amount of energy. So that's exactly what we want to avoid. This is a perverse outcome. We have the technology, it is available, but it's not being used, it doesn't disseminate because it is artificially expensive through these intellectual property rights. So the idea of the Ecological Impact Fund is to reverse that incentive, to say that we want to reward innovation, of course, but not with patents that make the use of a technology more expensive, but rather with impact rewards that, if anything, make the use of that technology less expensive. So we offer the innovator a deal that is especially confined to the Global South. And the deal is this: if you are willing to give up your monopoly privileges, your patent privileges in the Global South, we will in exchange give you impact rewards that are conditioned on the amount of emission reductions that are achieved with your technology in the Global South. That gives the innovator an incentive to make the innovation available at cost or even below cost, because they can now get the additional reward from the impact. And they will be highly motivated to provide support for deployment, for maintenance, for efficient operation, in order to ensure that the use of their technology will really have the maximum amount of impact on reducing emissions. That's the basic idea. The whole thing would work on a voluntary basis. So each innovator would have a choice whether to give up their monopoly privileges in the Global South or not. And that way, the fund would attract the very most cost-effective innovations into the mix. The rewards would work not according to a fixed schedule that you say you get so many dollars per metric ton of emissions averted, but rather it would be an artificial market where a fixed sum of money would be offered each year, would be dispersed basically, and it would be divided among the innovators in proportion to the impact achieved by each. That way, there wouldn't be a fixed reward payment per ton, but rather that reward per ton would be determined exogenously through demand and supply. So through the kind of market system, essentially. And that would ensure that the reward rate is always adequate, because if it weren't adequate at one point, innovators would step back and would no longer offer innovations into the fund. But it would also never be so large that innovators would collect windfall profits out of the system. So the reward rate would equilibrate to a level where it is just sufficient to attract an appropriate amount of innovation. Last point maybe is that in this race to develop green innovations, there would be no preference for any particular type of innovation. So any innovation is paid for, is rewarded according to the emission reduction that can be achieved with it. And of course, in particular, innovations that are of special use for poor people, that meet the interests and needs of poor people, would here be prioritized, because these are the kind of innovations that haven't yet been developed. Because under the existing system, they face heavy obstacles, because poor people don't have the kind of purchasing power. So it would fill a gap in that area. That's what you could naturally expect. And in the competition to develop such innovations, Southern innovators would not compete with the kind of disadvantage that they face in competing for highly sophisticated innovations that are very capital intensive to develop. So I would expect that the business of developing innovations would be stimulated in the Global South through the Ecological Impact Fund as one side effect.
Thank you, Professor. I think that's a fantastic structure to get us started to think about how inclusive innovations or inclusive people from the South can actually benefit from traditionally very capex-heavy, barriers to entry. With climate tech being a very asset-heavy type of I would say, structure, and the entire sort of technologies that are being built rely on very heavy investment. It's important to have funds like these. I'll turn to you next, Ravindra. As Praj Industries, which is the organization that you represent, operates in sustainable biofuel in India, particularly as a supplier of bioethanol, how do you see technology playing a role in being democratized across borders? So what do you feel are some of the gaps in countries like India in terms of resources and talent and manufacturing expertise? And where do you think we need more capital intervention from global sources? And lastly, how do we take some of the technologies that we're building in countries like India, and how do we take those abroad?
First of all, I want to thank Samir, Pramit, and entire ORF team for wonderful organization of this prelude to COP28. Also, thank you for the opportunity and invitation. Now, that's a great question, because the whole idea is to make technology commercially viable, feasible to everyone in Global South. So before we dive into technology, let me just underline the imminent danger of climate change. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations General Secretary, said that the era of global warming is over. We are in the era of global boiling. And he said that on the backdrop of July being the hottest month ever experienced, with average surface temperatures to the tune of 17.1 degrees or something. Subsequently, August experienced highest ocean surface temperatures. There was a report that was released yesterday stating that October will go down in the history as the hottest October ever. And the way we are progressing in 2023, that also may be one of the hottest year on the record. Studies have shown that the number of climate disasters in last 2 decades of previous millennium, and if you compare them with climate disasters of in the first 2 decades of current millennium, there is a significant rise in numbers. And obviously, when climate calamities like heat waves, floods, droughts, so on happens, there is immense economic damage. And World Meteorological Report is on record saying that in last 50 years, the damage is of the tune of $40 trillion. Most of the economic damage is attributable to developed nations. 9 out of 10 human lives lost are in developing nations. Such is a terrible problem we are faced with. Indeed, technology has a solution if we can harness the prowess of technology. Bioeconomy has emerged as one of the most promising pathway at sustainable climate action, and a very promising pathway for net zero, race to zero campaign. Incidentally, bioeconomy also touches or encompasses 11 of the 17 sustainable development goals. And when we say bioeconomy, we are essentially talking about harnessing the prowess of agricultural residues, biological feedstock that is available in abundance, which is renewable in nature, and through a knowledge-based economy, creating value-added products, whether it is fuels, chemicals, and so on. The list can go on. My company, Praj Industries, specializes in the industrial biotechnology, and even more specifically biofuels and biochemicals, which you rightly pointed out. Now, when we harness bioeconomy, we have absolutely a low carbon economy going on there, because we all studied in science that plants absorb carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and the good products made from plants when consumed emit carbon dioxide. So bioeconomy essentially promotes a circular biocycle. It's a low carbon cycle, unlike fuels which are derived from fossil resources. So if we look at the technology, there are 4 pathways to net zero. One is energy transition, another is deforestation, third is carbon capture, and fourth is circular economy: reduce, recycle, reuse, replenish, repurpose, rescale. So if we concentrate on the energy transition, which is actually moving away from fossil fuel to cleaner, greener sources, biofuels and biochemicals score a big way. Biofuels actually help sustainable decarbonization of the transportation sector, and that includes surface, air, as well as marine. And these are all hard to abate sectors, so its decarbonization is an imperative. There are strong legislations that are coming in which are actually forcing the transportation fuel mix to get in favor of biofuels. Now, talking about India and India's progress in this domain, my company actually is in private sector, but still we decided that we need to be self-reliant as far as the technology development is concerned. Because in India, we have ample of talent, we have ample of resources, institutions, labs, everything to innovate. So instead of depending on global north and royalties on the technology transfer, which actually make the project unviable, we decided, our visionary promoter, Dr. Pramod Chaudhary, who is also a techno entrepreneur, decided that he will set up state-of-the-art facilities in India. And today our facility has over 400 international patents for cutting-edge technology embedded solutions for decarbonization as a race to zero campaign. We also have technologies which optimize the energy footprint, utility footprint, and also energy efficiency, throughput maximum. So various domains. So this technology we have been able to deploy very successfully in India. And as I think Ambassador said, that India is already 12% ethanol blending, which is one of the success stories, and also going up to 20%. And there are much bigger things on the cards. So India is on its route to making a big stamp in the overall global bioeconomy. And I think we saw some of the wonderful outcomes of Delhi G20 Climate Summit. I think you again mentioned that signing of Global Biofuel Alliance is easily the watershed moment. And that actually shows India's prowess of taking the technology to the world. So next question you asked is, what are the gaps in India which India needs to overcome so that we can get to a next level? So India badly needs better infrastructure. There are compressed biogas plants, but which do not have the city gas network pipelines for evacuation. So that is just one example. Or if we harness the electric vehicles, we do not have enough charging dispensing stations. Ambassador also talked about the sustainable aviation fuel, which is the next big thing. So India is blessed with sun, land, and agriculture, and we can indeed deploy and harness our resources to make India as a sustainable aviation fuel hub. Unlike the existing hub in Middle East or in Singapore, which are not blessed with agricultural resources, India might as well play that big role because aviation is a global problem. So we need to set up capacities to take the aviation sector to the next level. And obviously all these institutions that we have in India do not exactly work in sync. We have, and as we all know, next level of innovations are cross-discipline in nature. Chemical, biochemical, thermal, IT, AI, ML, all of that. So there needs to be some synchronization to take that ahead. So these are some of the gaps. I'm sure with good progressive policy mechanism, we can move forward. The last point you asked is, how do you take Indian technologies outside? So Global Biofuel Alliance is a wonderful platform, and I'm sure in COP28 summit, it's going to get extensively deliberated, where know-how transfer, technology transfer, high caliber manpower of India, Indian experience in policy making, sustainable ecosystem development are some of the wonderful learnings through Global Biofuel Alliance we'll be able to take forward. The last minute inclusion of African Union is a watershed movement because all the tropical countries, whether South America, Africa, are again blessed with wonderful agricultural resources. They do not have technology. So India has much to offer. So I think very exciting times ahead. And coming COP28, as His Excellency said also in the speech, is a very, let's say, a landmark moment in the history of human fight against climate change.
Thank you, Ravinder. Just wanted to turn to you, Stefania, about some of the points to draw from what Ravinder said. He spoke about bioeconomy and the prospect of agriculture, especially in the global south. Some of the largest cultivable land exists in countries like India, and wanted to get your thoughts on how we harness, technologies in these regions, and particularly try to translate these into sustainable learnings for corporations or for young people who are next in the employment track, and helping them to kind of see what the sort of perspective is in emerging markets for transitioning to green.
Thank you for your question. I would like to make a little introduction. I mean, the need for a fair energy transition is evident in numbers. Consider that the International Energy Agency estimates that investment in renewable energies is emerging in emerging economies must triple by 2030 to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So we have an emergency. And today's technological gap is an emergency. Over 80% of renewable technology patents are held by developed countries, leaving the global south at a disadvantage. We have already seen this phenomenon during the pandemic, because with countries having greater access to vaccine and others not. So as the pandemic required a coordinated global response to ensure equity in vaccine distribution, concrete action is needed to address this technological gap in renewable energies. So what are the possible solutions? Of course, we can do grants, credit guarantees, private investments like, the World Bank and the Green Climate Fund done. Also, green subsidies like those promoted by European Commission, aiming for a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emission by 2030. All shared patents and intellectual property rights should be shared. And I think that is an important point. But in my opinion, promoting a model of integral ecology development should be one of the first points of action. Why? Because this model is based on the idea that to address environment challenges, we must consider the interconnection between all dimensions of reality. The approach considers environmental, social, political, human, cultural dimensions in a systemic way, creating a human and natural ecosystem that can feed and regenerate themselves over time. This approach not only helps bridge the gap, the technological gap, but contributes to the sustainable development of emerging markets, acting to the root of the problem. So, for example, rather than relying only on technology, this model emphasizes the possibility of working in harmony with natural systems. For instance, promoting regenerative agriculture improves soil fertility and carbon capture. And if you use this kind of approach, you improve also biodiversity, but you have also healthier food. And this is because regenerative agriculture produces also healthier food, which is beneficial also for people. So you can have also a reduction in healthcare costs. And you can, meanwhile, improve the local economy also because of the growth of the sector. I think that if the sector grows, creating economic prosperity, it will naturally be able then to integrate technology in the process. Another thing is that this model emphasizes the involvement of local communities and in the design and also in the implementation of the innovation. So this could happen even for energy policy projects. And this is also ensure that solutions are tailored to specific local needs and resources. For example, the promotion of inclusive business models allows the community to directly benefit from investments in clean energy. And also training and education are the key points, in my opinion, because the model of integral ecology, acting on education as continuing learning, can train people to lead and support the transition. This can help Global South become not just consumer but producer of clean technologies. In conclusion, I think that the issue is that addressing the technological gap in the renewable energy sector requires a global effort, of course, but it needs a more holistic and systemic approach. And the transition toward a sustainable energy future is not only a matter of technology, but also of integral development. Because adopting models of integral ecology means, for sure, addressing environmental challenges, but it means also create economic opportunities so that even Global South can have the chance to be protagonist in the transition.
Thank you. This is perhaps a good segue to your work, Barata, as being based in South Africa and with your focus on women and girls. How do you think that technology can play a role in closing the skills gap, and particularly around the subject of climate change, where the most vulnerable communities are all impacted are, in fact, women? And you mentioned that you've also have some learnings from the G20 that you'd like to bring to light here. So would love for you to go into detail on this subject as well.
I just want to stress that I firmly believe, and I think the people that work with me firmly believe, that it's only through skills, education, and capacity building that will get women out of poverty. And we cannot do it anyhow. Women have been denied education for a very long time. And technology offers an enabler. So the work we do is we're teaching women how to code, how to become data analysts. And the reason we believe that that's the way for them to get into the job market is because once women learn how to use technology and learn the skills that are relevant in the market at the moment, they then immediately become remote workers, which is something that women couldn't do in the past. They immediately become consultants in fields that are new in technology. We do know that tech is changing and evolving the skills that we need in the future. And at the moment, the education system, the traditional education system, can't meet those needs. So organizations like Girl Hype, which is what we do that because we give skills that they wouldn't normally get on a traditional education system. And you can reach women at an early age. So to give you an example, we've just opened, in partnership with Women in Tech and the Rotary Seapoint based in Cape Town, we've just opened an innovation lab in a high school. And in the innovation lab, we're teaching high schoolers coding. We start them with basic skills of coding, but once they know that, we do robotics, and then from there they learn data analytics. By the time they finish matric, these are young girls who are very vulnerable in Africa. At that age, teenage pregnancy is very high, but now you've redirected them to a program that is building their skill sets that makes them immediately employable. Should something happen in their life, they don't get a job, they don't get to go to higher education, then they know that I can go online. There's e-learning platforms that can change my life. It doesn't mean because I became a mom or I didn't get money to go to further my education, my life is doomed. They know about e-learning platforms. They know. So tech has just made education accessible to women. Now, you talked about climate change. I'm going to tell us a little bit of a story prior to It's been 17 years now that a girl was born on a tree in Mozambique during the worst flood Mozambique had ever experienced. And imagine that grandmother sitting there helping and giving birth to someone is giving birth and you are helping and the baby is caught on a blanket. If those two women had access to knowledge, if the data was collected properly by the Mozambican government, they would have known that should this disaster happen, and obviously it stuck everyone back. There are so many women who are pregnant, there are so many old women, the population, what do we need to do to address the demographics and the challenges that are going to attack, that are helping us? So a 17-year-old now, who was born on a tree, literally changed the whole dimension of what climate change was doing in Mozambique, because nobody gave a damn until that picture went viral on the internet. It wasn't as viral, it would have gone down, but it went on all the newspapers and the world caught attention of what does it do to a woman to be 9 months pregnant and there's floods. What happens in that situation? So climate change is going to affect women more than we think it is going to be. Most women they have anemia. I'm one of those people who had life was changing for me and I got anemic and I didn't know why. I'm tired. I don't want to go to work. I'm waking from a bed. I'm missing meetings. And then I thought to myself, it's very unnormal for me. And people were getting upset with me. And I went to a doctor and she said, you are anemic. And anemia comes also with age for most women because that's when our blood fibroids and what comes into the picture. And those are things that most women in Africa don't know. So for me, learning platforms is where we should teach women, how do you get information and content about your health? Health is very important. How do you get content about, should something happen? Climate change is a big problem, but we shouldn't make it a problem that's going to affect women's growth and young girls' trajectory of life. Because what happens is every crisis in the world, we know there's a crisis, women and girls are going to suffer. Purely by natural design of a woman's body on certain things and by virtue of us not preparing for that. And for me, in closing, I would say, with the G20, one of the things that I really learned was the priority. We had women-led development as a strategic development. We went to Goa and we literally met with ministers, presidents, and to have women of that high caliber sitting in one room, creating a platform and a stage for them to have their voices heard. I think that India did very well. And it didn't just end in India. We took it to Africa, in Kigali, where we focused on health issues and issues. We're discussing issues that are really pertinent to women, and they get slipped under the cracks when you start discussing at G20 level. So I think for that women-led development as a strategic goal for India's G20 presidency, it's something that could go even into COP28, because issues that are discussed there and women learn from each other on how can I go better in my country. And then the next thing is the DPI technology that they've implemented. It has really captured the data, the essence of what do you do when you want to change a human being's life is only through data. And I think that is what I would take forward.
And thank you to all the panelists for your remarks. I think we have just under 6 minutes to take some questions from the audience before we then turn back to the panel for closing remarks. So I think we have about time for about 3 questions, if anyone would like to step forward.
My name is Amina. I'm from Pakistan and I work on agriculture systems. Stefania mentioned about the regenerative agriculture and food systems. So this comment is more so linked to that. Sometimes clean technology is available, but there is no incentives to use that. One example for that is that farmers in Pakistan, now more and more people are getting aware of the alternate wetting and drying technology in rice production. So this technology reduces rice emissions by a significant 40%. And without impacting yields. But it's a very cheap technology, but it requires a lot of drudgery or man hours for the farmer to walk into a flooded field full of water, measure the water levels, and then come back and report it and then take action accordingly. This is not an easy task. Therefore, sometimes we do have options available, but we need to look at some of the sociological aspects of it and whether it can be acceptable in the circumstances at the community level. Number two, sometimes I think there's a chicken and egg solution, chicken and egg problem. For example, regenerative agriculture, as you mentioned, it's obviously it improves soil fertility. It's excellent for the food that is grown because it uses less fertilizer. But we need to be aware that in the short term yields drop. Yields are decreased. The reason is we don't have the right kind of technology or the seed varieties to adapt to the regenerative agriculture systems. For that, we need additional technology, such as for precision planters, for raised bed makers, which is one of the main key features of regenerative agriculture. If you don't have that, you can't really be able to match the yield of traditional agriculture. And therefore, at the end of the day, profitability at all levels, including profitability of small farmer, is very important when we talk about technology and adoption of that technology in any community. Thank you.
I want just to tell you that I agree that it's kind of process, you know. You can do this kind of approach, integral ecological development, and then you can add technology. But you need a health territory to put technologies in, you know. That's why I agree with you.
Thank you so much. My name is Joshua Sabetulu, coming from Zambia. I work for MIET Africa. My question is around some of the agricultural disparities that we have faced. I think coming from Africa, most of our farmers have been privileged to be one of those young people who have been part of the survey that sought to assess the impact of climate change on the agricultural practices of women. And one thing that came out was these women want to apply technological facilities to enlarge their business and their farming practices. But then it appears on many fronts, they lack education and orientation to these technological facilities that are out there. And secondly is that the technological facilities that are there are unaffordable for them. And in as much as they would want to make progress and also advance their agricultural practices, but they are faced by this barrier of being able to access the technological facilities that are there. Perhaps my question would be, what deliberate mechanisms can we employ in order to ensure a balance and bring up everyone to speed for the very fact that we don't want to leave anyone behind? What are those deliberate steps that we can take or deliberate mechanisms we can employ to ensure that women are empowered and they're adequately empowered? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Barata, you might want to answer that question. What deliberate mechanisms can we employ to make sure that key actors such as women are not left out of the overall climate agenda?
I think funding, there's a technological gap that exists. The people who own technology are producing technology. They are owning a monopoly now at the moment of making technology very expensive and inaccessible. I think women adopt technology super fast. If you go to the farmers, because we used to train them on a basic Microsoft platform on how to capture emails, how to send emails and do business. And we worked with women in the farmer. They just did our course for 1 week and they were doing beyond what we taught them. However, most women were carrying cell phones that couldn't do that. And the platform that we were paid for to teach them on, which was an agricultural platform, wanted them to pay a subscription to use the platform. Now, that is a very unfair price that they had put there because we knew that that's just for profit. So I think it's purely an investment thing. We need proper investment to make sure that women are getting access. the technological gap is purely a monopoly and it just needs to stop. And I think it's because Africa doesn't also, or the global south, we haven't been given enough funding to produce our own tech. The tech that's there is a hybrid that comes with a huge price on it because some corporate wants to make a profit. And then besides that is cooperatives, women coming together, forming cooperative to drop the price because as one you can achieve. And collaboration, making sure that we collaborate. If I bought this most expensive equipment, we can collaborate on using it effectively amongst ourselves. So there should be ways to overcome this technological gap that exists.
Thank you. And as we draw this conversation to a close, just wanted to ask each of the panelists to perhaps talk maybe for a minute or two just about your perspectives looking towards COP28. What would you like to see coming out as the outcome of these discussions, particularly with the question around technology and access to technology to the populations of the global south? So maybe we'll start with you, Ravinder.
Yeah, okay. So I well and truly believe biofuels is an idea whose time has come. Indeed, the word that you nicely use, democratization of biofuel technologies around the world for the better of the humanity. So we believe that at COP28, GBA Alliance should get a big lift. We always talk about climate funding. I think we need to have some provision to take the innovative technologies from flask to bench to pilot to demo scale so that we can accelerate the technology innovations which will benefit the masses further. So I think one of the major themes we are looking at COP28 is signing up more people on the Global Biofuel Alliance, including those nations and companies which are fossil fuel driven. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Professor Poch?
So we need, exactly as you say, we need to develop these technologies. And then the next thing is we need to make sure that they diffuse.
Yes.
And here I want to say something very trivial that you all know, but I think that bears repeating, and that is that green technologies have one very special feature, unlike all other technologies, namely that the benefits of using them don't go to the buyer and the user for the most part, right? I get a little bit of benefit if I drive a green car. I breathe a little bit cleaner air. But 99.9999999% of the benefit goes to humanity at large, future generations, animals, all living things on this planet. And if we don't work that into the incentives, the buying incentives, then this will be ignored for the most part. Nobody is going to give that much weight to these benefits if they are not benefits for oneself and one's near and dear.
From my part is that the global south must start solving our own problems. At the moment, I know in Africa, proven there's 500 million people that are undocumented. And with India's DPI solution, I think we could copy that as Africa to make sure that learn from each other, that we document people, we analyze what are the challenges that are facing Africa. And as climate change is a crisis, that crisis when it hits us, where do we invest? How do we make sure that we are ready and prepared? Especially, I mean, my country was not prepared when the floods happened in KZN. If we had prepared ourselves, especially by documenting people and making sure that things happen, then we are ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that education is the focus point because, you know, also acting on digital divide in general is very important today because the absence of knowledge about technologies is the absence about the world now. And we need to improve that in the global south, everywhere, I mean, but in the global south, I think that it's one of the key points.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Really thought-provoking discussion and looking forward to collaborating with you all in the future. And thank you for having us on the panel.